We talk about measures of success and what they look like in the music industry or your personal goals. And there's a lot of different facets of what it means to be successful. But for me, and this has been reflected in the business decisions that I've made, the ultimate goal for me is to be able to be that vessel for those authentic stories and that authentic experience and really touch people's hearts and minds.
Hey everyone, welcome to Venture Out, a podcast series from Entrepreneurship that shares the brave stories of Northerners who are inspiring innovation and community well-being through business. I'm your host, Zena Cowan.
We are fires across the tundra. We are ice of a million years. Our mothers, our fathers hold us. We stand together.
This is a brand new season of the podcast, and I'm so glad you're here because it's been a little while and there's been lots going on. So please grab a cup of tea and get ready to indulge in some beautiful and inspiring storytelling. I feel really fortunate that I get to work on this podcast as part of my role as co-director at Entrepreneurship alongside my co-lead, Ben Scott. For those of you who might be new to our work, Entrepreneurship's mission is to empower Indigenous entrepreneurs to build sustainable businesses and livelihoods across the North. And a big part of that work is amplifying stories of Indigenous excellence through entrepreneurship and innovation. And that is the inspiration behind this podcast, Venture Out. Okay, I now want to invite you into today's episode. Let's just get into it. And what I will say for me personally is that the most inspiring part of all of this work at Entrepreneurship is the storytelling. The stories that come from the entrepreneurs and their journeys, both personally and professionally. So on that note, allow me to introduce you to today's guest, my friend, Leela Gilday. Leela is a passionate singer-songwriter and soulful performer whose voice comes straight from the heart. She's a member of the Dene Nation, and if you're from the North, her music is home. If you've never been, her music will take you there. Born and raised in the Northwest Territories, Leela writes about the people and the land that created her. She's toured with her 4-piece band through every province and territory in Canada and across the globe. Since 2002, Leela's released 5 solo albums, 2 of which have won the JUNO Award for Indigenous Music Album of the Year. I wanted to interview Leela for Venture Out for a few reasons. First of all, and I don't say this lightly, Leela has one of the best voices on the planet. Secondly, Leela's a seasoned businesswoman, and she talks about consistently having to recommit to her career because music is a volatile business, and I think this mindset and this experience is something that will resonate with a lot of the entrepreneurs who are listening. So, without further ado, let's meet Leela. Leela, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to see you over Zoom. And for everybody listening, I just want to acknowledge Venture Out's theme song, Fires Across the Tundra, was written and performed by you. And I remember when we were first getting the podcast going, I reached out to you for musical direction. And you so generously offered this song for us to use. And it's just a really beautiful way of setting the tone for what Venture Out is all about. So thank you.
Masicho, yeah, it's wonderful to be here. And congratulations on all of the work that you and your team have done on this amazing podcast in the last couple of years. Yeah, that theme song, it was born out of a collaboration that we did for the Arctic Inspiration Prize several years ago. Alyssa P. Isaac and Diet and myself. And yeah, we really tried to highlight the idea of how people can be beacons of light and hope and really follow their heart and their passion. And so yeah, I'm so honored that you chose that song.
Yeah, there are some amazing collaborations that come out of the North. And I think this track really illustrates this idea that we think a lot about at Entrepreneurs, centering Indigenous entrepreneurs as these catalysts of prosperity and drivers of social change within their own communities. And on a personal level, I think it's really exciting when we have artists on the show who can really reflect that balance or that tension between making art and also wearing that entrepreneurial hat. So that's what I'm excited to talk to you about today. But first, let's just go back to the very beginning, Leela. I'd love to hear about your story growing up, because I know that where you come from has had such a huge impact on your creative practice.
Yeah, so Danet S is I Leela Gilday City D. Johnson bat ke siat se so tine ke satu gut ine. And I'm a singer-songwriter. I always say from the Dene Nation, but more specifically, my family is from the Sahtu. On my Dene side of the family. On my settler side of the family, my dad is from Southern Ontario, from London, Ontario, and who moved up to the north in 1972 and never looked back. Um, so yeah, I think when I think of myself and my life's work and my music, I think I've always striven to, tell the stories that are important to me, and that necessarily reflects that very strong connection to the land and the water, and how Dene are not separate from the land and the water. That's kind of like a worldview, a key worldview. And so yeah, telling those stories like in an authentic way has been a little bit of how I've tried to follow my heart and guide myself through what can be like a very challenging business. The music industry is a very challenging business.
Yeah, and I think that connection to the land and to those stories really explain why it's been so important for you to build your music career in the North, even though there's a lot of pressure on artists to move down south to the bigger urban centers like Toronto or Vancouver. I want to ask you about your roots, Leela, as a singer and as a musician, because I'll never forget the first time I heard you perform live. It was at a very intimate event in Yellowknife at the museum. And as soon as I heard you sing, my jaw dropped because you have one of the most naturally gifted voices I've ever heard. And obviously, it's something that you honed over time and did a lot of training on, but like it's also a gift that you were clearly born with. And then on top of that, you have this songwriting gift as well. So you're a singer and then you write these beautiful stories. And I want to know, like, where did that come from?
Well, the way that you framed that kind of is quite lovely in that you said that I'm naturally gifted, and that kind of is in line with what I believe, which is that the ability to sing is a human birthright, and this voice that I've been gifted it comes from the creator and that I become like a vessel. So I've worked, very hard throughout my life to develop my talent. Growing up, I was very lucky to be able to have the support of my family and friends and community to be able to participate in educational experiences, to develop my skills. And then it was my choice, after high school, I went to university to be able to study music and to develop those skills further. But I think ultimately, when it comes to music, it's kind of in the realm of one of the most transformative and mystical human experiences. And so I have this gift from the creator, and it's my job to be able to just be the vessel that works through. And sometimes it's been very, very challenging. I mean, many times it's been very challenging. But in the best of times, I'm able to just open myself, let go of my ego, and be able to express those things that come through me and reach people's hearts and minds. And so that ultimately is like my measure of success, because we talk about, measures of success and what they look like in the music industry, or your personal goals. And there's a lot of different shades of this, a lot of different facets of what it means to be successful. But for me, and this has been reflected in like how I've tried to form my business model and the business decisions that I've made, that is truly the ultimate goal for me, is to be able to um, open myself, be that vessel for those authentic stories and that authentic experience, and really touch people's hearts and minds and open their minds.
As I'm hearing you describe your work and that work essentially being like a vessel, being a conduit, like to me, that's an entrepreneurial way of thinking about your offering. And it comes from this place of humility, almost like this place of service. You're really crafting something of value for your audiences. Do you remember at what distinct point you made the decision to say, I'm going to give this my all and I'm going to see if I can do this as a career?
Yeah, so that is a decision that I think artists have to continually make. And certainly it's one that I've made several times in my life, beginning with the choice to study music at university. I think when I went to university, I studied opera. When I finished university and graduated from my bachelor, I was headed kind of straight into this like master's program, the path that a classical singer would take. But I put the brakes on because I wasn't hearing my own creative voice represented in the stories that I was singing. Like that didn't feel like the right path for me. And so I decided to begin really focusing on songwriting. Because songwriting is something that I had begun when I was a child, or 11 or 12 years old, but it wasn't a serious pursuit until I came out of, you know, music school. Nowadays, if you look around, there's lots of Indigenous classical music, lots of Indigenous classical repertoire. And I think if I was coming up now, I might take that route. But when I graduated, I wasn't seeing those options around me at that time, to tell, a Northern or Dene story, or even from the perspective, a really authentic female perspective, woman's perspective. Um, so a lot of the music that I was singing was not reflective of those experiences. So I decided I'm going to put music school on hold for a minute and put this path on hold. And I'm going to start writing my own songs, accompanying myself, but with the guitar, and see where this takes me. Um, it was definitely a choice. I look back and I think there are any number of paths I could have taken, but I'm glad that I took the chance and took the risk to pursue that.
I'm glad that you did too for a couple of reasons. One, because your writing is such an essential part of your practice today, and the storytelling that you do, the language that you use in your songs is so important, and for me, so uniquely Leela Gilday. Um, Also, that you had the guts to do it at a time when there weren't nearly as many Indigenous voices and perspectives and stories being shared in songwriting, right? Like, do you remember what that feedback was initially? Were people excited to hear those stories? Because definitely that was not the easier route for you to take.
That's a very good question. Were people excited to hear my stories? Yes, there was definitely an awakening at that time. And there were, many musicians, many Indigenous musicians who had kind of like broken open some doors or, opened some windows for people like me coming up. I feel like I benefited from that momentum. It still felt like I was swimming against the tide though, because there was all kinds of expectations surrounding what Indigenous music sounds like, or what an Indigenous musician is. Um, and I was just, I didn't label myself, you know, an Indigenous musician. It was just topically what inspired me, what was the stories that I ended up telling. And as a writer, you write what you know. So I came up as a singer-songwriter. It wasn't as easy as it is now. For sure. Not to say that it's easy to become a musician by any stretch of the imagination now, but when I put out my first record, the internet wasn't in most households, and that has changed the industry in a significant way. So while I remember my mentors and the people that did help me, I also think that when I'm really reflecting on it, it was a very difficult choice. There was a lot of loneliness and really struggling against many, many different barriers and obstacles that I look around and I see the barriers and obstacles that are there now. But I see a lot of the infrastructure that my colleagues and I have built to help, other Indigenous musicians not have to struggle against that. And I feel lucky about where we are.
I think that's really important to reflect on. And I know that, in any industry, from generation to generation, there can be significant changes. And it's key to acknowledge the work that you've done, particularly in uplifting other Indigenous female singer-songwriters in the space. And I'm wondering, thinking back to those early years as you were venturing out on your own, what was the first, particular moment of success or something that let you know, hey, this is a good thing? I'm on the right path, and I'm glad that I made this tough decision.
In this conversation, I lost the first question that you had asked, which was about when was the decision made that you would be full-time. And I kind of talked about that detour that I took to write music and how that was responsive to my inner creative voice. And that was really the time that I said, okay, I'm really going to give this a go. Um, and then what followed was basically 10 years of very difficult struggle financially. And not just financially, but, emotionally. At that time, you really had to move to the South to be able to make any kind of headway as a musician. And So having to leave the north and live in these big cities, which was exciting at the time and wonderful, and I don't regret it, but I also had always intended to move home. So yeah, that decision to be full time, I think, like I said, I had to continually re-examine it because there is precarity to the music industry. You don't have the kind of security that a day job provides. You have to plan very, very carefully, budget very, very carefully. And so I think the first time that I thought like, oh, this was a great decision was maybe when I was able to move home in 2009 and afford to live here. And so that was wonderful. But that was after my first Juno, and I had reached a level of success. In terms of like an emotional and spiritual motivation for that, I have always felt very reassured and that the stories that I'm telling are relevant and moving. So because of the reactions of my audience, not just my friends, so that's great, but the impact on other people and how my music does reach people. And I think like that, the industry has changed quite a bit. There's a lot more. Your music is viewed more as a product now rather than an experience. And so that's been kind of difficult for me to navigate, but I always go back to like a couple of different experiences. And one was, it was in 2009, and I had come back to Yellowknife for the summer to play the at the time Aboriginal Day Live, like APTN did these remote stages, and they asked me to play the one in Yellowknife, and I came with my band, and it's a huge stage. And I remember during my performance, there was like all these little girls, like these little Dene girls, like standing in front of the stage with their heads like on top of their arms, like looking up. And it was such moving and pivotal moment for me to realize that they were seeing that, oh, here's a Dene woman who can stand on the stage and command it and be comfortable with all of these technical things and sing her own songs. And that was a powerful moment for me. And I know some of those girls still and see what they've done with their lives, and it's amazing. But I do go back to that moment sometimes when I think about, well, what's the point? Because music as a business is a tricky thing, because music is for everyone, and there's always a point to like sitting in your living room and playing or just like listening to music. Whatever you do as a music maker, there's always a point to that, and that is like a personal, spiritual, emotional journey. But if you're going to make music as a business, you have to really carefully examine like, what is the impact of your business? Is it purely commercial, or is there another motivation that you have? And for me, that motivation to change people's minds and hearts is really at the base of things. And this idea of being a role model or like a beacon for other Indigenous people to address the social change that we need to overcome this colonial trauma, that is like a huge part of who I strive to be.
Okay, so a couple of things are coming up for me. First of all, I can just picture all those beautiful little girls taking you in on the stage and how transformative of an experience that would have been for them. And like, I'll just speak for myself. When I've seen you perform live, it feels like a spiritual experience for me because of your ability to connect with your audiences in a really authentic way. Most recently, I got to see you here in Whitehorse at the Arts Center. I was with our mutual friend, Katie, and the entire time you had us we were right there with you. It felt so personal. We were laughing and crying, and I left your show thinking, oh, that felt like such a beautiful piece of humanity. That you're right, like in today's world where so much of music is commodified and digitized, you just don't have that experience. And I also like really resonate with what you're sharing about pursuing that impact. As an artist and also as like an entrepreneur, what is my why? And I think it's fair to be consistently asking yourself, like, you know, is this feasible? Is this something that I can do? I think a lot of people in entrepreneurship ask themselves that question because of the precarity of creating something and putting it out there into the world. So I would love to hear a little bit more about the business of your work and the business of music, because you've shared it's challenging, and it was super challenging for you in the beginning, but obviously you picked up some sensibilities along the way. And I'm curious, like, was that sort of intuitive for you, or did you have experiences that allowed you to develop that entrepreneurial mindset?
That's a good question as well. So I never really thought too much about the business of music when I was studying music. It was all about developing my skills. Because I started performing when I was 8 years old, but I never like made a career out of it. It was just performances found me. I would go and do those performances. Like, I didn't view it as a business. So it was a real shift when I decided to release my first record. I had to kind of learn a lot in a very short period of time. Um, and because I did it independently with no, like, I self-released on my own label. I had to learn all of those systems. And it was just kind of a method of trial and error. I realized in order to achieve my goal, I had to learn these kind of systems of how, like, like literally learn the business of music, in a few short months.
And Leela, can I just ask, was there a choice behind doing that self-release? Is it just really hard to get on a record label? And then, there's that part about basically having to give up a lot of control?
It wasn't a choice for me because I was never attached to the music industry. Like, I was just a musician. I wasn't courted by labels or agents or anything. So for me to like, try to get in with an agent or a manager or a label, that was just like a mountain that I wasn't ready to climb. And, I saw that there were other independent musicians that could release their music. And I was like, this is how I'm going to do it. So, um, over the years, I've built up more of a team, but I've never signed with a different label. I've never had that kind of industry support. So all of my career has been self-built and self-managed. Um, but at that time, I had moved to Toronto and started a job at what was then the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation. And I learned so many business skills under the tutelage of John Kimbell, um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, who is a Mohawk symphony conductor and mad genius who ran the Canadian Native Art Foundation, which turned into the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation, which is now called Inspire. Um, at that time, he kind of ran the foundation and was putting on these large, lavish shows. There was a whole department dedicated to youth scholarships, and that was the division that I was assigned to. So we did Indigenous youth career fairs all over the country, and my business skills developed in that year that or 2 years that I worked there. Um, and at the same time, I was building my song catalog, like writing my songs. And then subsequently, I worked for my best friend who opened a film and television company called Big Soul Productions. And so I kind of extended my skill set there by working as a production coordinator and production manager in film and television. So I think all of these skills that I learned to conduct myself through the music business were sort of gathered ad hoc. And now I look at like there are so many mentorships available and free online training available that you can really kind of start to understand business of music and that just weren't around when I was trying to establish myself. However, I did have two people that really helped me, and that was Sandy Schofield in Vancouver. She connected me with my distribution company, they still distribute my music, and then Elaine Bomberry, who was one of the people instrumental in establishing the JUNO category for Indigenous people. So I really look back and I look at these aunties. I mean, I was I was hungry. I had all of this potential and skill that I had built, and so I think if a young person has spent the time building their skill and really working on their craft, when it comes to music, it doesn't matter if you don't know the business, you can learn it.
I think that pathway that you're describing is really relevant to those listening who are in entrepreneurship or wanting to build up their professional arts career. You can't put a price on work experience because you pick up so many interchangeable skills organically along the way. And I think if you go into those experiences consciously thinking, okay, what am I picking up here? What am I developing as I'm doing this job? Then you can carry it forward with you. And if you're on top of it, other people are going to recognize that. And people who are in leadership roles, decision-making roles, not everybody, but the right ones are going to recognize that. And they're going to want to take you under their wing and really nurture that potential. So thank you for acknowledging and naming some of your mentors. I know that mentorship is a big part of what you do now as an established musician who is, an icon and a matriarch in Canada's music scene. And I've seen you over the years support a number of young Indigenous artists working on developing, their technical sound, but also like the business side of what they do. And I think a lot of people appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's a very like Indigenous model of economics. The mentorship piece and like the reciprocation of like you attain some success. I'm putting that in air quotes too, because we talked about measures of success. And then you hold your hand out for the next person and you bring them into the circle. And that's like very much a part of how we operate as Indigenous people, or even just Northerners. Like we are focused on community. So it's not just like what you can achieve in your own life and your skills and I have nothing against formal education. I think formal education is great. I thrived in music school. I loved university. But I think this idea of mentorship is at the heart of like the true educational journey, which is your whole life.
Yes, and I'm thinking about how you are infusing your cultural values as a Dene woman and as a Northerner into your business and mentorship practices. I think one of the things with mentorship is it can help to address some of the common challenges that are confronted when building out a business. And I'm sure this obviously applies to the music industry. So, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you had to confront on your journey?
I think I alluded to it earlier, um, when I said that the music industry, choosing a career in the music industry is like necessarily accompanied by financial precarity. And that's goes back to kind of like the paradigm that we live in. So capitalism does not believe that art is valuable because it is very difficult to commodify art. And we have seen this change quite a bit in the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years with streaming and with these models where major corporations are making billions of dollars on, commodifying music. But at its heart, being a musician and making music is not a commodity. It's an experience. And so it's kind of like this tension of like pushing, like commodifying something or making a living from something that is at its heart not a commodity is like a very push and pull thing. And that's why I said I've continually had to re-examine whether I wanted to make music my career. I've left music like in a real way 3 times after, in the last 22 years since I've been full-time in music, because it's just been either too hard financially or too hard emotionally or spiritually, or I've felt I'm making too many sacrifices, and I've made some major personal sacrifices to have this career. Um, but I don't believe that that has to be the case for everybody, and I don't believe in the axiom that you have to starve to be true to your art. That is like a construct, like a social construct that we all kind of are subscribing to, but I don't believe that's the case. I think that art has value inherently and that artists should be remunerated for their art if you choose to make it a career. So, I mean, those are the financial challenges have been some of the big challenges because of the nature of my industry. The other ones have been personal challenges. And like I mentioned, the major sacrifices I've made, the doors that have been closed upon me by decision makers and the gatekeepers in my industry, which now, as I'm the chair of the board of our new national organization called the Indigenous Music Office, and we're like hammering down doors for Indigenous musicians, and this is built upon years of work of that the work that other musicians have done as well. And it's so heartening to feel like to be in this moment because I have personally experienced a lot of negativity and discouragement from many different sectors. And I don't think it's reflective of my talent or my stories.
Oof, yeah, and like coming to that realization takes a lot of life experience and also support from other people within the community, and that's why I think it's so important to have Indigenous voices and professionals around the table who are shifting the industry because it is really challenging, like you said, to be operating within a framework where there's still a lot of misogyny and extraction that's happening, and you've been through it, you've seen it, you know what it is. So, Leela, now that you're in this position of leadership and you're right in the center of these critical conversations, do you feel hopeful that there is a possibility of creating a space for Indigenous music to really be properly valued?
Yes, I absolutely feel hopeful and positive, and I kind of look to some of the work that the Indigenous Screen Office has done surrounding narrative sovereignty because it's so important to be able to tell our own stories, and this resonates within music as well. Um, there's this cultural erasure of our music and stories, that's gone hand in hand with the cultural genocide that's taken place. Down south, there's certain periods of time in the last 100 years where people were forbidden to sing their songs or to do their ceremonies, forbidden by law. Like they could be charged if they sang their songs and thrown in jail. So coming from this type of perspective to come to where we are now, which is to say, I'm seeing all of the doors being thrown wide open. The gatekeepers are handing their keys over. It's still a challenge to figure out that larger sort of like the paradigm issue of living in a capitalist society. Like, how can we shift this and have everybody have a living wage, being able to feed their families, being able to do what they feel is right and what they love? That's like the greater question. But in terms of starting to shift the needle on the industry, there is a great hunger for Indigenous music, as evidenced by powwow music, for example, has major followings on TikTok, like millions and millions and millions of listeners. And so it's really like a matter of trying to connect and tap into those audiences and really allow for special targeted programs and initiatives for Indigenous artists to create and record their music or share their music. We're living in a very exciting time, and I feel very excited. So the work that I'm doing with the Indigenous Music Office, and then we have a very exciting young collective of artists from the Northwest Territories called the ATI Indigenous Artists Collective that I'm a part of. We just launched a major mentorship initiative. The IMO, we just launched our mentorship initiative. Like, this is happening. I feel like in the last 10 years, there's been like a critical mass. And ultimately, Indigenous music and Indigenous stories are not just about making things better for us as Indigenous people. They enrich the world. And I really fully believe that Indigenous ways of knowing and being and worldviews are the key to a better future for the entire planet.
Right. And those Indigenous ways of knowing and being and that reclamation work is showing up in so many different ways in Northern communities, like through language and conservation and art and leadership. And we're now starting to see this movement of Indigenous entrepreneurship that is shaping new perspectives on economic well-being and building sustainable livelihoods around cultural knowledge and practices. And at Entrepreneurth, we actually just wrapped a cohort focused on Indigenous language innovation that included 9 entrepreneurs who are all developing product and service offerings rooted in language. And it was amazing to witness.
Well, I think it's an act of like radical healing and like radical self-love and radical community love that these people are engaging in. And I'm so excited to be able to witness like some of these businesses that are up and running and that are growing and operating around the North, because like so much of what we perceive the business opportunities in the North to be are like resource extraction. And unfortunately, that's a reality. That's a lived reality in many communities, is that if you want to be able to feed your family, you have to have a government job, or B, work for the mines or some sort of, for the oil fields or whatever. And so shifting gears into an ecotourism company or a fine jewelry business as a way of making a living, that is powerful stuff. Like, that is That changes everything.
Yes, and we're seeing that change unfolding in communities across the North. And that is one of the inspirations behind this podcast. It's about centering the voices of Indigenous entrepreneurs who are creating businesses that really uplift their communities. So, yeah, thank you, Leela, for sharing with us today what it has looked like for you to build a business around music and art in the North. And I know you said that you left the music industry like 3 times, but I'm just so glad that you've kept coming back and that you're still here doing this work. And you're a big inspiration to me.
Masicho, Zena, it's great to talk to you. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to reflect on this crazy life's work.
Okay, now it's time to go listen to some Leela Gilday. Her website is leelagilday.com, and she's got an active Facebook page where she posts all her news and show dates. And of course, you can find her songs on Apple Music and Spotify. Venture Out's production team includes myself, Brandon LaRock, and Jess Duncan. Our theme song is called Fires Across the Tundra, and it's by the one and only Leela Gilday. You can find Venture Out on all your favorite podcast platforms, and if you like what you're hearing, subscribe and give us a rating. That makes a big difference. See you next time.
We are fires across the town.